Everyone needs to clear the square. Now. 200 folding chairs. A live camera. A father mid-speech about still running this house. And his daughter, stepping out of the crowd with a voice that stopped him cold. "Sabine, stop talking, Dad." He'd never heard that tone from her. Not once. Not in 30 years. Because underneath a wire hidden in the town's own PA system, someone had turned his retirement ceremony into a trap. And the quiet woman he thought moved paperwork overseas was already moving toward it. Eyes cold, steps precise, every instinct trained for exactly this moment. The mayor froze at the microphone. The crowd went silent. And then it happened, the word nobody in that square was ready to hear, crackling out over live radio traffic for the whole county to catch. Major Calder, his daughter, a commander, and the truth was only just getting started. Part 1. The town of Larkspur Hollow woke up smelling like coffee and gun oil and cut grass, which was fair, because that's what 40 years of retired soldiers do to a Virginia zip code. They mow their lawns in perfect diagonal lines. They polish their trucks like they're still standing formation. And on a morning like this, one flag's out, bunting stretched across Main Street, the volunteer fire department already double parked outside the diner. They wake up early enough to watch the sun climb over the water tower and pretend they aren't nervous. Holt Calder was nervous. He would never say it. Never in 100 years. Because saying it meant admitting it, and admitting it meant being seen, and command sergeants major do not get seen. They see. That was the whole point of 30 years. You disappear into the job until the job is the only thing left standing. Except today, the job was over. Today they were retiring him in public, on a stage, in front of a television camera that belonged to the local station and half the county. Today they were going to call him a legend. And Holt Calder, 66 years old, 2 knees held together with titanium and stubbornness, stood in his kitchen at 5:40 in the morning, ironing a dress shirt he didn't need to iron because the dry cleaner had already ironed it, just to have something to do with his hands. His daughter was already awake. He knew because he could hear it, not footsteps. Nothing so obvious. Just the particular quiet of a house with 2 people in it who both knew how to move without being heard. A floorboard that didn't creak because someone had learned exactly where to place their weight. A door that opened at the pace of a held breath. He told himself it was a coincidence. That Sabine had simply picked up his habits growing up, the way kids pick up their parents' accents. He told himself that every single morning. He believed it a little less every single morning, too. She came down the stairs in running clothes at 5:45. Same as always. Same as every visit for the last 4 years, however short those visits ever were. "You're up," Holt said, not looking away from the shirt. "You're ironing a shirt the dry cleaner already ironed. It relaxes me." No, it doesn't. She was already lacing her shoes at the bottom of the stairs, one knee up on the 3rd step, movements clean and economical. "You're nervous." "I am not nervous, Dad. I have given 4,000 briefings in my career. I have stood in rooms with generals who wanted my head on a stick. I am not nervous about a stage in a park." "Okay." She switched feet, laced the other shoe. "Then why has that shirt been under the iron for 6 minutes?" He set the iron down, hard enough that it clacked against the board. "Because I like a crisp collar." "Sure, I do. Sure, Dad. Ping pong." That was them. Had been them for 30 years, ever since she was old enough to talk back and stubborn enough that talking back never stopped. He used to think it was disrespect. Louise used to tell him gently, patiently, every single time, that it wasn't disrespect. It was inheritance. The girl talks back because you taught her to never let a challenge sit unanswered. You can't complain about the echo, Holt. You built the canyon. He missed Louise every day. Some days it was a low hum under everything. Some days, like today, with the whole town about to gather and clap for him like he'd done something more remarkable than survive, it was a fist in the sternum. "You eating?" he asked, changing the subject the way he always changed the subject. Straight into logistics. Food, gear, timeline. Emotions were a country he visited only under duress. After the run, "It's 90 minutes till we need to leave." I know what time it is." She was already at the door, her hand on the frame. And then she paused just a half second, just long enough that if he hadn't spent 30 years reading body language for a living, he might have missed it and looked back at him. "You're gonna do great today. I know that. I'm serious." "So am I." She almost smiled. The real one. The one that used to show up when she was 6 years old and had just outshot every boy at the county fair with a BB gun and looked at him like she was waiting to see if he was proud or embarrassed. He'd been proud. He just hadn't known how to say it in a way that didn't sound like a briefing. He never really learned. The door shut behind her, soft, deliberate, and Holt Calder stood alone in his kitchen, holding a shirt he didn't need to iron, listening to his daughter's footsteps disappear down the driveway, at a pace that was, if he was being honest with himself, a little too fast and a little too even to be a woman going for a casual morning jog. He noticed things like that. He just never let himself follow the thought all the way to the end. Sabine ran the loop she always ran when she came home. Down Larkspur Road, past the Hendersons' fence line, where the dog no longer barked because the dog had died 2 winters ago, and nobody had the heart to tell the mail carrier to stop bracing for it. Past the little Baptist church with the sign that changed its joke every Sunday, down to the creek bridge and back. 6.2 miles, 41 minutes. Heart rate never above 140. She could have gone faster. She never let herself go faster in this town, because a woman running a sub-6 pace through Larkspur Hollow got noticed, and noticed was the one thing she could never afford to be here. Not with the cover intact. Not with the story. Everyone believed that Major Calder was a logistics officer stationed overseas, that she moved paperwork and pallets and nothing sharper than a stapler sitting as thin as it was over what she actually did for a living. Which was fine. Which was the job. Which was something she had chosen with both eyes open at 22 years old, standing on the plane at West Point in the rain, when a recruiter for a program she wasn't allowed to name out loud even now had looked at her file and said, quietly, "You understand once you're in, your father can never know the real shape of it. Not the unit. Not the missions. Not even the truth of the rank on your collar when he's not looking at it." She'd said yes before he finished the sentence, because some part of her, the part that had spent her whole childhood watching her father's eyes, slide past her the way you slide past a chair in a room, familiar, unremarkable, load-bearing but invisible. Some part of her had wanted exactly that, a life he couldn't measure against his own. A life so far outside his frame of reference that he couldn't stand in the doorway of it and tell her she was doing it wrong. Except now, 8 years later, standing at the top of Larkspur Road with her lungs burning clean in the June morning air, she wasn't sure anymore if the secrecy had been protection or just a very long, very expensive way of making sure he never got the chance to be proud of her out loud. Stop it, she told herself. Not today. Today is his day. Except her body didn't stop scanning. It never really did. That was the other thing about the program. It didn't just teach you skills. It rewired the base operating system. Even here. Even on a residential street with a dead dog's ghost bark and a Baptist church with bad puns. Her eyes cataloged the parked cars without asking permission from the rest of her brain. A blue sedan she didn't recognize parked one house too far from any actual house, angled for a clean sightline down toward the town square instead of toward any driveway. Probably nothing. Probably a relative in town early for the ceremony. Probably. She logged the plate anyway. Old habit. The kind of habit that had kept people alive in rooms she was never going to describe to her father. Not this year. Not any year. Maybe not ever. Which fine. Fine. She could log a license plate and still go home and eat pancakes and watch her father get his shirt collar exactly right and clap when the mayor called him a hometown hero. Those two things could exist in the same morning. They had to. That was the whole architecture of her life. 2 women sharing one body. One who came home for the weekend and ate her father's overcooked eggs and lied about a desk job in a windowless building overseas. And one who had, 4 months ago, walked into a compound outside a city she was never going to name and walked back out again with information that had since kept a great many people from finding out what a truly bad week felt like. Both women were currently jogging past a dead dog's old yard at a very carefully unremarkable pace. Because that's the job, she thought, and immediately caught herself doing the thing Doc Hollis always teased her about, narrating her own life in briefing language, even in her head, even on a morning run, even when nobody was listening. "You're allowed to just have thoughts, Major," he'd told her once, over cold coffee in the back of a truck outside a country that didn't officially exist on the mission log. "You don't have to file a sitrep on your own feelings." Old habits. She turned back toward the house and didn't look at the blue sedan again, which was its own kind of tell if anyone had been watching her closely enough to notice that she'd stopped looking on purpose. Breakfast was eggs, overcooked, the way Holt had always made them, the way Louise used to gently steer him away from, and never quite succeeded. Sabine ate them anyway. Some things you didn't correct, some things you just swallowed, literally, because the alternative was explaining to a grieving widower that his eggs had been bad for 15 years and nobody had the heart to tell him. "You talked to your brother?" Holt asked, not looking up from his plate. "He's not my brother, Dad. Might as well be. Boy's been coming to Thanksgiving since he was 9. Theo," she said. "His name is Theo," which was a small, private joke only she understood the shape of, because Theo Bramwell had never once set foot in this kitchen, had never eaten a single overcooked egg at this table, and existed in her father's imagination as some vague family friend from her supposed logistics unit only because she'd needed a name to explain a phone call 3 Christmases ago that had gone on 11 minutes too long. She'd built her father a whole fictional found family out of half-truths and misdirection, one detail at a time. The same way you build a blind in the woods branch by branch, until the thing you're hiding behind looks exactly like the landscape around it. "Well," Holt said, "tell Theo I said hello." "I will." She would not. She would instead, in approximately 6 hours, be sending Corporal Theo Bramwell a message on a channel that did not officially exist, asking him to run a plate on a blue sedan that was very probably nothing. "You're doing the thing," Holt said. "What thing?" "The thing where you go somewhere else behind your eyes." She blinked, recalibrated, smiled the smile that had gotten her through 11 Christmases and 4 redeployments and 1 very close call in a stairwell she still dreamed about sometimes. Just thinking about work. The logistics, she agreed, and hated herself a little, the way she always did, for how easily it came out now. 8 years of practice will do that. Sand down a lie until it doesn't even feel like one anymore. It just feels like Tuesday. Holt set down his fork, and here it came. She could see it coming the way you see weather coming. A change in the pressure of the room before the first drop falls. "You know," he said, "I never did understand what you actually do over there." "I move things, Dad." "Pallets. Paperwork. It's not exciting. 8 years and I still don't have a straight answer out of you. There's nothing exciting to tell. Your mother used to say the same thing about you when you were 7. Said you had a face like a locked door." He almost smiled. "It didn't quite make it all the way there. I used to think that was cute. And now? Now I think it's a professional habit." He looked at her, really looked. The way he almost never did. The way that made her want to fold inward like a knife closing. "You've got the same look the young sergeants used to get, right before deployment. That 1,000-yard thing behind the eyes, even when they're standing in a kitchen in Virginia eating bad eggs. They're not bad, Dad, they're terrible. Your mother was too polite to tell me and I never bothered learning to cook different. Ping pong. Deflection met with deflection. Both of them experts at the same evasive maneuver, executed from opposite sides of the same grief and the same pride and the same 30 years of a man who loved his daughter enormously and had never once found the right words to say so without wrapping it in a joke first. He stood, rinsed his plate, set it in the drying rack at the exact same angle he'd set every plate for 4 decades, because in Holt Calder's kitchen, even the dishes stood at attention. "Today's not about me," he said, to the window over the sink rather than to her. "Today's about the men who didn't come home. I'm just the one standing up there because I'm the one who did." Something in Sabine's chest went very quiet and very still, because that was the truest thing her father had said all morning. And it was also, she was almost certain, not the whole truth. There was a shape underneath his words that she had felt her entire life without ever being able to name it, some old debt he carried. Folded up small and tucked somewhere she wasn't allowed to look. She didn't know what it was. She'd stopped asking around the time she turned 16, after the one time she'd pushed too hard about the incident in the desert, and gotten 3 days of silence in return. Silence so total it had frightened her more than any punishment could have. Some doors in this family stayed locked on both sides. Dad? You did good, whatever it was. You did good enough to still be standing here. He didn't answer right away. Just kept looking out the window, at the flag on the porch snapping gently in a morning breeze that smelled like cut grass, and somebody's neighbor already grilling too early. Get dressed, he said finally. We leave in 40 minutes. The town square by 9:15 looked like a postcard trying too hard. Red, white, and blue bunting looped along the gazebo railing. Folding chairs in crooked rows. Because nobody in Larkspur Hollow had ever once set up folding chairs in a straight line, and nobody ever would. A local news van from WLKH, parked at an angle near the fountain, its mast antenna raised. A young production assistant in a headset jogging cable across the grass like the fate of the free world, depended on getting the feed up before 10. Sabine noticed the van before she noticed anything else. Not because it was strange. Local news covered things like this all the time. Small town legend hangs up the uniform. 40 years, 3 tours, a bronze star nobody in this square could correctly describe the actual citation for. Perfectly normal segment. Perfectly normal van. Except the cable run was wrong. She clocked it without meaning to. The way you clock a misspelled word on a sign you weren't even trying to read. The main feed line ran from the van to the gazebo stage, which was correct, which was expected. But there was a second line, thinner, running not to the stage, but to a junction box near the base of the old oak tree, at the square's edge, the one that fed the square's permanent PA system, the one used for the 4th of July and the Christmas tree lighting, and every town hall meeting since before she was born. Local news vans did not typically tap into a municipal PA junction box. Stop, she told herself. You're doing the thing. You're doing the thing Doc always yells at you for. Not everything is a threat vector. Sometimes a cable is just a cable. Except her feet had already started walking her toward the oak tree before the rest of her had finished arguing with itself. Sabine, her father's voice. Behind her, she turned, and there he was in his dress shirt, the one he hadn't needed to iron, flanked by 2 men she recognized instantly, even though she hadn't seen either of them in almost a decade. Mac Rayner, who'd served 2 tours alongside Holt back in the desert, walked with a cane now, and a grin that hadn't aged a day. And beside him, smaller, quieter, a man she didn't know at all, mid-50s. Dark jacket despite the June heat. Standing at the edge of the group the way you stand when you're trying very hard to look like you belong somewhere you don't. Sabine, you remember Mac? Course I do. She shook his hand. Warm, real. Nothing wrong with Mac Rayner at all. Good to see you, Mr. Rayner. Look at you, Mac said. Last time I saw you, you were this tall and threatening to shoot my kneecaps off with a BB gun. I still could. I believe you. Ping pong. But the friendly kind. The kind that made her smile without having to manufacture it. And then her eyes slid, politely, naturally, to the man beside him, waiting for an introduction that didn't come. Mac hadn't brought him. Her father hadn't brought him. He was simply there, adjacent to the group, close enough to seem attached to it, far enough to slip away without anyone quite noticing if the moment called for it. And you are? Sabine asked, extending a hand, keeping her voice at exactly the register of small-town pleasant. The man's eyes moved to her hand, then to her face. Held there a half-second too long. Just here to watch, he said. Heard it was quite a ceremony you people put on. You people. Odd phrasing for a man supposedly from 3 towns over. She filed it. The way she filed the license plate. The way she filed everything. Always, whether she wanted to or not. Well, she said, and shook the hand he finally offered, dry, deliberate. A grip calibrated to feel ordinary and somehow underneath the ordinary, not hope you brought sunscreen. Man's going to talk for a while." "I imagine he will," the stranger said, and something in the way he said it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up, though she could not for the life of her have told you why. "Men like your father usually have a great deal to say." He walked off before she could answer. Toward the folding chairs. Toward the crowd already beginning to gather. Sabine watched him go and felt the morning tilt, very slightly, off its axis. "Friend of yours?" she asked her father, keeping her tone light. "Never seen him before in my life," Holt said, already distracted, already scanning the crowd for the mayor, for the color guard, for the thousand small logistics of being the man of the hour. "Probably press." "Probably," Sabine said. She did not believe it for 1 second. By 9:45 the square was full. Folding chairs crooked and packed, latecomers standing at the edges with coffee cups from the diner, kids weaving through the crowd with sparklers. Nobody had lit yet because it wasn't dark and wouldn't be for 9 more hours. But try telling that to a 7-year-old on the 4th of July's little cousin holiday. The mayor, a soft, sunburned man named Guy Pruitt, who Sabine remembered mostly for having once judged the county pie contest so badly that 3 grown women stopped speaking to him, for a year stood at the gazebo microphone testing levels with the enthusiasm of a man who loved the sound of his own voice more than the occasion deserved. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Behind the gazebo, the WLKH camera operator adjusted his tripod. The production assistant with the headset crouched near the junction box at the base of the oak tree, doing something to the cable Sabine still could not get a clean look at without making it obvious she was looking. She drifted that direction. Casual. A woman stretching her legs before a long ceremony, nothing more. "Morning," she said to the PA. A kid who couldn't have been older than 23, headset askew, sweat already beating at his hairline in the climbing heat. Big setup for a retirement speech. "Tell me about it." He didn't look up from the connector he was fiddling with. "Boss wants a clean simulcast. Local cable, the website, and apparently some county-wide alert tie-in for the fireworks announcement later. Whole thing's a mess." "County-wide alert tie-in?" "Yeah, some emergency broadcast thing. Above my pay grade. Some contractor came by an hour ago. Said the system needed a patch before the feed went live, or the whole square's PA would drop mid-ceremony. I just plug what they tell me to plug." Sabine's stomach went cold and very, very still. "Contractor," she repeated, evenly, carefully. "The way you say a word you need to remember exactly." "Yeah, dark jacket. Didn't say much. Had the right badge though, so." The kid shrugged, oblivious, already moving on to the next cable in his hands. "You need something? Ceremony starting in like 10 minutes. "No," Sabine said. "No, I'm good." She was not good. She walked away from the oak tree at a pace that cost her every ounce of discipline she had, because every cell in her body wanted to run, wanted to pull the junction box open right there in front of 200 folding chairs and a county's worth of casserole dishes. And every year of training, she had screamed at her to do the opposite. Do not spook the target. Do not compromise the cover. Confirm before you act. You are not wearing a rank right now. You are a logistics officer's daughter in a sundress standing in a park. She found a spot near the back of the crowd, pulled her phone from her bag. Thumb moving fast, muscle memory outrunning thought, typing into a thread that did not exist on any server the town of Larkspur Hollow could trace. Possible device tampering. Town Square PA's broadcast junction. Unknown male mid-50s. Dark jacket, posed as AV contract. Need immediate ID run, plate attached. Do not alert local authorities yet. Standing by. She hit send and looked up just in time to see her father climb the 3 short steps onto the gazebo stage. Dress shirt crisp, shoulders squared, 30 years of discipline holding his spine in a line so straight it looked like it hurt. The crowd began to applaud. Guy Pruitt leaned into the microphone, beaming, sweating, utterly unaware that somewhere at the base of the old oak tree 8 feet from his podium, a piece of hardware nobody in this square had authorized, sat wired directly into the system about to broadcast her father's voice to the entire county. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor said, "please join me in welcoming a true son of Larkspur Hollow, 30 years of service." a hero in every sense of the word. Command Sergeant Major Holt Calder. The applause rolled up like a wave, and Sabine Calder, 30 years old, Major, United States Army, commander of a task force that officially did not exist, stood at the back of a crowd of folding chairs with her phone screen glowing in her palm and every muscle in her body coiled tight as a trigger spring, and thought, with a clarity that felt almost like calm, I am not going to let anything happen to him. Not today, not on this stage, not in front of this whole town. Whatever this is, whoever that man is, I found you first. Holt reached the podium, adjusted the microphone with the unhurried confidence of a man who had briefed rooms far more dangerous than this one. He looked out at the crowd, at the folding chairs, at the flags, at Mac Raynor, grinning like a fool in the second row, at the mayor already dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief, and for one unguarded second, before the speech began, before the performance of Command Sergeant Major Calder took over from the man underneath it, his eyes found his daughter at the back of the crowd, and he smiled at her. Small, private, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with 30 years of service and everything to do with a little girl who used to sit on his shoulders at the county fair. Sabine smiled back and felt something in her chest tear very quietly down the middle. 'Cause in about 4 minutes, depending on how long her father's opening remarks ran, she was going to have to decide whether the woman in the sundress kept smiling at the back of the crowd, or whether the major finally, after 8 years of careful architecture, stepped forward and became visible. Friends, Holt began, his voice steady, carrying easily across the square without the microphone even needing much help. 30 years ago, I signed my name on a line I didn't fully understand the weight of. Sabine's phone buzzed once against her palm. She looked down. One line. From a number that would mean nothing to anyone else on Earth, that meant everything to her. Plate confirmed rental, false ID on file, cross-match pending. Second signal detected on site, not just the PA. Repeat, not just the PA. Get eyes on stage now. She looked up. Her father was still talking, still smiling that unguarded smile at the crowd, at the flags. At 30 years, he was about to compress into a 10-minute speech that the whole county was about to hear broadcast live, unaware that somewhere in the wiring beneath his feet, something else was listening too. And Sabine Calder Major, commander, daughter, the woman who had spent 8 years making absolutely certain her father never saw the shape of what she'd become, took one step forward out of the crowd. Because there are moments she would think later, much later, when the whole thing was finally over and she had the luxury of sitting still long enough to think it all, when the two women sharing your life simply cannot both keep breathing in the same body at once. One of them has to step forward, and the other one has to let her. Part 2, time does something strange when the ground shifts under you. It doesn't slow down exactly. It just stops asking permission. Sabine crossed the space between the crowd and the gazebo in maybe 6 seconds. It felt like 6 years. Her mind was already 3 moves ahead of her body evacuation vector, blast radius estimate if the device was worse than a broadcast tap, line of sight to the junction box, line of sight to her father, who was still talking, still smiling, still 30 seconds into a speech about a line he'd signed his name to 30 years ago, without knowing the weight of it. He had no idea how right that sentence was about to become. And I want to say, before anything else, Holt was saying into the microphone that, whatever they call this ceremony, it was never really about me, Dad. Her voice came out low, level. Not loud enough to carry to the folding chairs, but pitched exactly to cut through 30 years of a father's instinct to keep talking through interruptions. Stop talking. He heard it. Of course he heard it. He'd spent 3 decades learning to hear the one voice in a crowded room that meant something had gone wrong, and some buried animal part of him still recognized his daughter's voice in that register, even though he had never, not once in her entire life, heard her use it. He stopped mid-sentence, which, for Holt Calder, was its own kind of earthquake. Sabine, everyone needs to clear the square. Now. She was already moving past him, toward the oak tree, toward the junction box, her eyes cataloging exits, cataloging the crowd, cataloging the dark-jacketed man who she registered with a cold drop in her stomach, was no longer standing where he'd been standing. Gone. Vanished into 200 folding chairs like smoke, finding a crack in a door. Guy Pruitt, the mayor, leaned toward the microphone with the baffled expression of a man whose pie contest just got interrupted by a woman he vaguely remembered as the veteran's quiet daughter. "Aye, folks, if we could just, sir, step away from the podium." Sabine didn't look at him. Her eyes were on the box, on the wiring, on a small matte black unit zip-tied to the junction, its status light blinking a slow, patient amber that made every hair on her arms stand up. Not a bomb. She'd seen bombs. This was something else. Smaller, uglier in its own quiet way, a signal injector. Something built to hijack a broadcast, not destroy a park. Which meant somebody wanted an audience. Which meant somebody wanted her father's retirement speech to become a stage for something else entirely. Her phone buzzed again against her palm. Confirmed. Device is a broadcast override, not explosive. Repeat, not explosive. But there's a secondary transmitter on site. Separate frequency, actively pinging. Someone local. Someone close. Advise extraction of principal immediately. Someone close. Someone in the crowd. Sabine's eyes swept the folding chairs one more time, Mac Rayner half risen from his seat. Kane forgotten, face going through confusion, and then something closer to recognition, like a man watching a dream he'd had once about this exact daughter turning out to be true. A woman in a sun hat clutching a casserole dish like a shield. A boy with an unlit sparkler staring up at her with the frank, uncomplicated fascination of a child who has just realized the boring lady from the porch across the street is doing something that looks like it belongs on television. And then she saw him. Not the man in the dark jacket. Someone else. A figure at the tree line beyond the last row of chairs, half in shadow, utterly still in a way that stood out precisely because everyone else in the square was in motion. Watching. Not fleeing, not confused. Waiting. Sabine did not have time to process what that meant. She turned instead to the podium, to her father, who was standing exactly where she'd left him, gripping the sides of the lectern like a man holding on to the last solid thing in a capsizing boat, staring at his daughter with an expression she had spent 30 years trying not to need him to wear, and had never once seen on his face until this exact moment. Not disappointment, not confusion. Recognition. "Sabine," he said again, quieter now, just for her. "What is happening? I need everyone off this stage." She grabbed his elbow. Not gently. Not the way a daughter steers her father. The way a soldier moves an asset. "Now, Dad, move. You don't give me orders in my own. I do today." And because some part of him, the part that had built a career on recognizing command presence, the instant it walked into a room understood, even through the fog of shock, that his daughter's hand on his arm was not a daughter's hand at all right now. Holt Calder let himself be moved. The mayor was already stammering something into a dead microphone. The WLKH cameraman had swung his lens instinctively toward the commotion instead of away from it. Because that was what cameramen did. That was the whole design flaw of local news. And Sabine understood with a sick lurch that whatever was about to happen in the next 90 seconds was, in all likelihood, going to be broadcast to the entire county whether she wanted it to be or not. Fine, let it broadcast. She keyed the small transceiver clipped inside her collar, a piece of equipment no one in Larkspur Hollow had any reason to recognize, disguised well enough to pass as a hearing aid to anyone not looking closely, and her voice dropped into a register. Her father had genuinely never heard from her in 30 years. Flat, fast, absolute, Nightgrove actual to all elements. "We are hot." Repeat, "We are hot." Secondary transmitter active, unknown hostile in the tree line east of the gazebo. Possible additional hostile in dark jacket, last seen entering the crowd. "I need eyes and I need them now." Static. A half second of nothing. Then a voice came back through the earpiece, low, gravel warm, instantly recognizable to her and to absolutely no one else standing in that square. "Copy. Actual. Nightgrove is 6 minutes out. Doc's driving, which means it's actually 4. "Copy," she said. And something in her chest, some small, tired, human part of her that had been holding its breath for 8 years, nearly broke apart with relief at the sound of that voice. Because the whole square had gone very quiet around her. Because 200 people who had known her since she was a child running barefoot through this exact park were now staring at her, the way you stare at a stranger who has just, without warning, unzipped a mask and revealed a completely different face underneath. Because her father, who had spent 30 years believing his daughter moved paperwork and pallets in some windowless building overseas, was standing 3 feet away from her with his jaw slack and his eyes wide, hearing the word major float through the air toward her from the mouth of the mayor's own microphone, which someone, somewhere, was still recording. Major Guy Pruitt repeated, dumbstruck, reading it off some radio traffic he had no business overhearing. Some scanner app on his phone he'd forgotten was even running. Major Calder. Wait. Sabine. You're active duty? Everyone needs to move, Sabine said. Louder now, pitched to Carrie. Pitched the way she pitched her voice across a compound at 3 in the morning, when lives depended on people obeying the first time and not the third. This is not a drill. Clear the square. Move to the church parking lot. Single file. Do not run. Do not push. And the strangest thing happened. They listened. 200 people who had watched Sabine Calder grow up quiet and a little strange and a little too good with a rifle at the county fair. 200 people who thought they knew exactly who she was, looked at the woman standing in front of the gazebo with her spine locked into a line as straight as her father's had ever been, and they simply obeyed. Folding chairs scraped. A baby started crying somewhere near the fountain. Mac Raynor, still holding his cane like he'd forgotten what it was for, looked at Holt with an expression that said several decades worth of unspoken things all at once, and then began herding the row nearest him toward the church lot with the brisk, automatic authority of a man who had once, a very long time ago, also known how to move people under pressure. Holt did not move. He stood exactly where his daughter had left him, staring at her back as she strode toward the tree line, toward whatever waited in the shadow there, and something in his chest cracked open that he did not have a name for yet, because the girl he'd raised, the girl who used to sit on his shoulders at this exact fair, who used to fall asleep in the truck on the drive home, smelling like funnel cake and sunscreen, who he had spent 8 years quietly, privately, aching over because he never understood why she'd chosen a desk job 3,000 miles away. Instead of coming home, that girl had just given a combat command in the middle of his retirement ceremony, and 200 people had obeyed her without question, including, he realized, staring at his own feet, staring at the shirt he'd ironed for no reason himself. Doc Hollis arrived in a truck that had absolutely no business being parked on Main Street, 4 minutes and 11 seconds after the call went out, which even by his own standards was a personal best. He came out of the driver's seat already moving, a duffel over one shoulder, his eyes doing the thing Sabine's eyes did, the fast unconscious sweep of every window, every rooftop, every parked car within 100 yards. Merrick Hollis was 51 years old and looked, most days, like a man who had been built out of spare parts. From 3 different decades, a linebacker's shoulders gone soft with age, a medic's hands gone permanently steady from 29 years of not letting them shake, a face that had learned, somewhere around Sabine's 3rd deployment under his watch, to look calm no matter what was actually happening behind it. "Talk to me," he said, falling into step beside her at the tree line. Broadcast override device on the PA junction. Not explosive. Secondary transmitter somewhere close, still pinging. 2 hostiles minimum. One in a dark jacket who's gone to ground in the crowd. One who was standing right here. She gestured at the empty patch of grass beneath the oak, at a single cigarette butt ground into the dirt with military precision, at nothing else. Whoever had been standing here had left nothing behind on purpose. That in itself was information. Gone before I got here. And your father? Alive. Confused, extremely confused. She didn't let herself think past that sentence. There would be time to think past that sentence later. There was never time now. Where's Bramwell? 2 minutes out. Running the secondary transmitter's frequency against known signatures as we speak. Doc's eyes flicked to her, just once, weighing something, and Cole's already inbound. Said she was in the area. Sabine turned her head. In the area. That's what she said. Renata told us this morning she was following up a lead 3 states over. Doc didn't answer right away, and that silence brief. Almost nothing. The length of a held breath landed in Sabine's stomach like a stone dropped into still water. Because Doc Hollis did not do silences by accident. 29 years in this business taught a man exactly how loud a pause could be. She's 20 minutes out, Doc said finally. She'll explain when she gets here, Doc. Later. Actual. Deal with the fire in front of you first. He crouched by the cigarette butt, without touching it, studying the ground, the way he studied a wound for what it told him about the thing that caused it. This wasn't opportunistic. Whoever staged this knew the ceremony schedule, knew the broadcast setup, knew exactly where the junction box sat and exactly how long they'd have before the PA kid noticed anything wrong. Which means they had eyes inside the planning. Which means, Doc said, standing brushing grass off his knee, somebody in this town has been feeding information out for a while now. Questions just how long, and to who. Sabine looked back across the square, at the last stragglers filing toward the church parking lot, at her father standing frozen by the gazebo with Mac Rayner's hand on his shoulder, at the WLKH cameraman still filming everything with the slightly manic energy of a man who had just realized he was about to get the biggest story of his career, and felt the whole architecture of her careful, quiet 8-year-old lie collapse in on itself, all at once, in the space of about 90 seconds. He knows now, she said, quiet, almost to herself. Yeah, Doc said, not unkindly, he does. I never wanted him to find out like this. Nobody ever does, kid. He clapped a hand on her shoulder, briefly, the closest thing to comfort the job allowed for. Come on. We've got a device to trace and a father to keep alive. The feelings can wait in line behind both of those. Theo Bramwell showed up in an unmarked sedan with 3 laptops open across the passenger seat and the particular energy of a 26-year-old who had joined the army specifically because he was better at finding people through their digital shadow than most humans were at finding their own car keys. He parked 2 blocks off Main and jogged the rest of the way with a laptop bag banging against his hip, arriving slightly out of breath, and immediately, apologetically, correct. Okay, so. He set the laptop on the hood of Doc's truck, fingers already moving. Secondary transmitters using a burst pattern I've seen exactly once before. Encrypted, short bursts, designed to be almost invisible unless you're specifically listening for it on the right band. And you were listening for it. I'm always listening for it. It's a personality flaw. He didn't look up. The signature matches a private security contractor who went dark about 6 years ago. Guy used to run close protection and surveillance for high-value corporate clients overseas. Name's Julian Voss. Something in the back of Sabine's mind clicked into place with the quiet, ugly click of a puzzle piece she had not wanted to find. Voss, she repeated. Ring a bell? No. She frowned. Should it? Theo's fingers kept moving, pulling a photo up on screen, a man in his early 50s, gray at the temples, a face that managed to look both entirely unremarkable and, once you knew to look for it, oddly familiar. It took Sabine a full 3 seconds to place what, because it was the man in the dark jacket. The one who'd introduced himself to her that morning, with a handshake calibrated to feel ordinary, and a smile that hadn't reached anywhere close to his eyes. That's him, she said. That's the man who was standing next to my father this morning. Yeah, well, Theo pulled up a second window, scrolling fast. There's more. Voss's service record before the contracting years. He was Army, infantry, did 1 tour, honorable discharge, medical, back in the early 90s. He paused, looked up at her for the first time since he'd arrived, and there was something careful in his expression, something bracing. Ma'am. His older brother was Army too. Same era, different unit. Okay. Killed in action. 1991. Theo hesitated, and in that hesitation Sabine felt the floor of the entire morning shift again, a second time worse than the first. Friendly fire incident. never fully explained in the public record. Cause of death listed as combat-related, but the after-action report's been sealed for over 30 years. Sabine did not say anything for a long moment, because 1991 was the year her father talked about the least. 1991 was the desert. 1991 was the 3 days of silence she'd earned once, at 16 years old, for pushing too hard about a question she'd never been allowed to finish asking. "Pull the unit designation," she said. Her voice had gone very quiet, very careful. "The brothers unit. I need to know it," Theo typed. The screen scrolled. And when the answer came up, Doc Hollis, standing beside her, went still in a way she had never once seen him go still. Not in 8 years. Not through firefights. Not through the worst nights either of them had ever survived together. Because the unit designation on the screen was her father's unit. The exact one, the exact year, the exact desert. "Sabine," Doc said, low, careful, using her name instead of her rank for the first time all day. "You need to sit with this before you go anywhere near your father with it." "There's no time to sit with anything, Doc. There's time for 30 seconds. She didn't take them. She found her father exactly where she'd left him. Though someone had at least managed to get him off the exposed gazebo and into the shade of the church awning, sitting on an overturned folding chair with Mac Raynor beside him and a paper cup of water he hadn't touched. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him look, which was its own kind of horror. Watching a man who had spent 30 years being the largest presence in any room he entered, suddenly folded down small on a metal chair, staring at nothing. He looked up when she approached, and his face did something complicated: relief and fear, and something that looked almost like shame, all crowded into the same expression at once. "Sabine." He stood too fast. His knee, the bad one, the titanium one, buckled slightly, and he caught himself on the back of the chair. What in God's name is going on? Who was that man? Why did the mayor say Major? Why did 200 people just watch my daughter give combat orders in the middle of a public park? "Dad." "Don't!" His voice cracked just slightly, right down the middle. "Don't dad me right now. Not until you tell me the truth. All of it. Right now." Around them, the church parking lot had become a strange, hushed staging ground. Doc quietly triaging a woman who'd twisted her ankle in the rush to evacuate. Theo hunched over his laptops in the open trunk of the sedan. Local police finally arriving 4 minutes too late to do anything but direct traffic and look bewildered. The WLKH cameraman being gently but firmly relieved of his footage by a man in an unmarked windbreaker who had appeared from nowhere and flashed a credential nobody in this town had the clearance to actually read. Sabine took a breath. There would never be a good version of this conversation. There had never been going to be a good version. Not in 8 years of careful architecture. Not in any future she'd ever quietly imagined, where she finally told him the truth on her own terms. In her own time, over coffee at this same kitchen table with the overcooked eggs. That version was gone now. Burned up in 90 seconds on a stage in front of a live camera. All that was left was this version. Raw, public, undignified. "I'm not a logistics officer," she said. "I gathered that. I command a task force. It doesn't have a name that exists on any public record. We do work that she stopped, started again. We do work that keeps things from happening. Things that would be very bad if they happened. I've been doing it for 8 years. Holtz stared at her. His jaw worked once, twice, like a man trying to find purchase on a slope that kept sliding away underneath him. 8 years, he repeated. "You've lied to me for 8 years. I protected you for 8 years. That is not the same thing, Sabine, and you know it is not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing when the alternative is you worrying every single day whether the phone ringing at 2 in the morning means I'm dead." Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, the first crack in her own composure all morning. And she hated it, hated that it happened here, in front of Mac Raynor and a church parking lot and half the county's emergency scanner traffic. "I watched what losing Mom did to you. I was not going to make you live every day wondering if you were about to lose me too." Something in his face flinched at that. Louise's ghost. standing between them the way she always did whenever this family got close to the edges of something too honest to say out loud. "That wasn't your decision to make for me," he said quietly. "Maybe not, but it was mine to make for myself." They stood there, 3 feet apart, the closest either of them had come to true honesty in almost a decade, and neither of them noticed Theo Bramwell walking toward them until he was almost on top of the conversation, his expression the particular careful neutral of a man about to detonate something he really did not want to be holding. "Sir." Theo addressed Holt directly, and something in his tone made both Calders turn. "Sergeant Calder, Major, sorry, we need to ask you about something. 1991, your unit. Do you remember a soldier named Marcus Voss?" Sabine watched her father's face do something she had never once seen it do in 30 years of knowing him. It went completely, utterly white. "Where?" Holt said, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Did you hear that name?" "His younger brother is the man who staged what happened here this morning," Sabine said, watching him now with the same clinical precision she'd use assessing a wounded asset, hating herself for it, unable to stop. "Julian Voss. He's been planning something around this ceremony." "Dad, what happened in 1991? Holt sat back down on the folding chair, slowly, like a man whose strings had just been cut one at a time instead of all at once. "Nothing happened," he said. "Marcus Voss died in an accident. Friendly fire. It was investigated. It was closed. The files sealed." "A lot of files from that war are sealed, Sabine. That doesn't mean—" "Dad." She crouched in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes, the way she'd meet the eyes of a source who was one heartbeat away from either telling her everything or shutting down completely. "A man just hijacked a public broadcast system at your retirement ceremony. His brother died under your command 35 years ago. I need you to tell me what happened. Not the official version. The real one." Holt Calder, 66 years old, 30 years of service, a chest full of ribbons he had never once fully explained to his own daughter, looked at her with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life, the look of a man standing at the very edge of a confession he had been outrunning for 3.5 decades, and finding, for the first time, that there was nowhere left to run. "Not here," he said finally, barely audible. "Not like this. Not in a parking lot." "Dad," Sabine, his hand closed around her wrist. Not hard, almost pleading. "Please. I will tell you everything. I swear to you I will tell you everything. Just not here." She looked at him for a long moment, weighing 30 years of a father who had never once asked her for anything, against every instinct in her body screaming that time was the one resource they didn't have. "Okay," she said finally. "Not here, but soon, Dad. Today." He nodded. Once. And in that nod she saw something break loose in him that had been locked in place since before she was born. They moved the operation to the Calder house within the hour, because it was the only structure in Larkspur Hollow with reinforced entry points nobody but Sabine knew about, installed quietly during a home security upgrade 3 years ago that her father had simply assumed was about smart doorbells and motion lights. Doc Hollis ran a fast sweep of the perimeter. Theo set up in the dining room, 3 laptops arranged around the good china nobody had used since Louise's funeral. Local police were told, with just enough truth to satisfy them, and just enough vague federal authority attached to keep them from asking further questions, that this was now a matter for other agencies. Holt sat at his own kitchen table like a stranger in his own house. He watched his daughter move through the space with an ease that unsettled him more than anything else that had happened all morning, checking sightlines through windows, positioning Doc near the back door, conferring in low, clipped sentences with Theo about frequency triangulation and known associates, and something called an extraction contingency that made Holt's stomach drop every time he overheard the phrase. This was who she'd been for 8 years. Not the girl who used to sit on his shoulders. Not even, quite, the woman who visited 4 times a year and ate his terrible eggs and talked about paperwork that didn't exist. Someone else entirely. Someone who had grown up inside a version of the world he understood intimately, had built his entire life around, and had never once let him see her standing in it. "You should have told me," he said, When Sabine finally sat down across from him, when the house had gone as quiet as it was going to get with 3 strangers running surveillance equipment through his living room. I know. Not because I deserved to know. Because I could have. He stopped, started again, quieter. Because I spent 8 years thinking my daughter chose paperwork over coming home. I spent 8 years feeling like I'd failed you somehow. Like maybe I pushed too hard when you were young, and you ran as far from this life as you could get without actually leaving it. His voice cracked. And the whole time you were exactly what I always. He stopped himself. Couldn't finish it. Exactly what you always wanted. Sabine finished for him, quiet, careful. Say it, Dad. I never wanted you to be a soldier because I wanted a mirror, Sabine. I wanted it because. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. And when he spoke again, his voice had gone rough in a way she had heard exactly twice before in her life, both times at Louise's bedside in the last week. Because you were the most capable person I ever met, and I was terrified the world was going to convince you otherwise before you figured that out for yourself. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Tell me about Marcus Voss, Sabine said finally. And Holt Calder, sitting in his own kitchen with his daughter's strange, quiet, deadly serious colleagues, moving through his house like it belonged to them now. Finally, after 35 years began. It was February of '91. Ground war had just started. My squad was moving to reinforce a position at night. Bad visibility. Sandstorm coming in, everything moving faster than it should have been. Marcus Voss was on the flank. Young, good soldier. Nervous but good. He stared at the table like he could see the desert and the wood grain. There was a report of enemy armor moving on our position. Confirmed by 2 separate sources. I called it in, gave the order to engage. And the report was wrong. His hands, folded on the table, had gone white-knuckled. It wasn't enemy armor. It was a friendly unit that had drifted off their assigned route in the storm. Nobody knew until it was already happening. Marcus Voss was killed in the crossfire, along with 2 others. That's not your fault, Dad. If the intelligence was wrong, I had a bad feeling. His voice broke. Finally, all the way, 35 years of held breath, finally letting go in his own kitchen with his daughter, and 3 strangers listening. I had a bad feeling about that report, and I gave the order anyway, because I was 28 years old and scared. And I didn't want to look weak in front of men who were counting on me to be certain. And I have spent 35 years telling myself that any officer would have made the same call with the same information. And some nights I even believe it. He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet, and it was the first time in her entire life Sabine Calder had ever seen her father cry. But I never told his family the whole truth. The official report said combat-related casualty, ambiguous circumstances. I let them believe it was the enemy, because the truth would have meant admitting. I hesitated for exactly 4 seconds too long before. I should have questioned that intelligence, and 4 seconds might have been the difference, and I could not live with them knowing that. So I let them bury a version of the stories that let me keep sleeping at night, instead of the one that would have let them actually grieve the truth. The kitchen was silent except for the low hum of Theo's laptops in the next room. Julian Voss found out somehow, Sabine said quietly. The real version. I don't know how. I never told anyone. Not even your mother knew the full truth, and she knew almost everything about me. Holt wiped his face with the back of his hand, a gesture so unguarded, so unlike him, that it broke something loose in Sabine's chest all over again. If he spent 35 years chasing the truth about his brother, and today he finally found a way to make me answer for it in public, then this was never about hurting you, Sabine said, working through it out loud, the picture sharpening even as it broke her heart to see it clearly. This was about making you tell the truth, in front of everyone, on camera. He didn't want to kill you, Dad. He wanted to force a confession. Then why the second transmitter? Doc's voice cut in from the doorway, where he'd been standing, listening, longer than either of them had realized. Why the second hostile in the tree line who didn't run when everyone else did? A man who just wants a confession doesn't need backup muscle in the tree line, unless he's planning to make sure the confession happens whether you cooperate or not. Sabine's blood went cold. Which means this isn't over, she said. Which means he's got a next move planned. And we just walked my father out of the one place he could reach him easily. As if on cue, Theo's voice came from the dining room, sharp and urgent in a way that cut through every other conversation in the house at once. Actual, you need to see this. Right now. The dining room had become a war room in the space of 90 minutes. China cabinet and Louise's old lace tablecloth, standing in strange contrast to 3 laptops, a spread of satellite imagery, and Theo Bramwell's face lit blue by 3 screens at once, his expression tight with something between excitement and alarm. I ran the burst signature further back, he said, not waiting for Sabine to fully enter the room before launching in. Found more activity from the same equipment set going back almost 8 months. Voss has been in this county on and off since last fall, renting a property under a shell name about 11 miles out, near the old Ashworth quarry. Show me. He pulled up a satellite image, an isolated farmhouse, outbuildings, a long gravel drive cutting through dense tree line. Property's been dark on every public record search, but the burst pattern traces back there consistently. If he's got a base of operations, that's it. And the second transmitter from this morning? Moving. Theo's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up a live tracking overlay. Left the square about 20 minutes ago, heading northeast, toward the quarry property. Doc leaned over the screen, studying the route. That's not a retreat pattern. That's a rendezvous. Which means whoever was in the tree line this morning is heading back to report, Sabine said. Already moving. Already pulling her jacket off the back of a chair, the major snapping fully back into place over the daughter in the space of half a second. Doc, get the truck. Theo, I need everything you can pull on that property in the next 5 minutes. Structural layout, entry points, anything. On it. What about your father? Doc asked. Low. Just for her. Sabine looked back through the doorway at Holt Calder sitting alone at his own kitchen table, staring at nothing. A man who had just confessed the heaviest secret of his life, and then watched his daughter's entire second existence assemble itself around him in real time. He stays here, she said, under watch. I am not losing him twice in one day. I heard that. Holt called from the kitchen, and there was something in his voice, thin, wrecked, but unmistakably present, that made Sabine's chest ache. I want to help. Dad, I know that terrain. He appeared in the doorway, steadier now than he had any right to be, 30 years of discipline reasserting itself over the wreckage of the last 2 hours. I know the quarry. Used to hunt out that way with your grandfather before it got fenced off. I know the access roads better than anyone your team's going to find on a satellite map. Sabine hesitated. Every instinct in her screamed to lock him in a safe room with a guard and handle this the way she'd handle any operation cleanly, professionally, without a 66-year-old civilian in the mix, retired command sergeant major or not. But she looked at his face, at the raw, open need in it. 35 years of guilt, finally spoken aloud, and now a chance, the first real chance he'd had in 3.5 decades to actually do something about it, instead of just carrying it silently. You stay in the truck, she said finally. You do not leave the vehicle. You do not engage. You are there for terrain knowledge, and terrain knowledge only. If you so much as reach for a weapon, I will have Doc sedate you myself. Understood, Major, Holt said, and something passed between them in that exchange, not quite an apology, not quite forgiveness, but the first real handshake of respect either of them had ever offered the other, as equals instead of father and daughter. Vehicles in 5, Doc called from the driveway. The road to the Ashworth quarry ran through 11 miles of thickening Virginia forest, pavement giving way to gravel, gravel giving way to a rutted dirt track that hadn't seen a grader in years. Doc drove. Sabine rode shotgun with a tablet balanced on her knee, Theo's live feed painting the terrain ahead in real time. Holt sat in the back, silent, watching the trees slide past with the fixed, hollow expression of a man revisiting every choice of his life at once. 2 minutes out, Doc said. Cole still not answering? Sabine checked her phone again. Nothing. 3 missed calls to Renata Cole, all unanswered. The silence stretching longer and stranger with every passing minute. She said 20 minutes out, over an hour ago. You think something happened to her? I think, Sabine said slowly, working through a thought she did not want to be having, that I don't know anymore, and I hate that I don't know. They killed the headlights a half-mile out, easing the truck into a stand of trees off the main track, the quarry property visible now through gaps in the foliage, the farmhouse dark, one outbuilding showing a thin seam of light beneath its door, a single vehicle parked near the barn that Sabine recognized instantly, with a cold, sick lurch, as Renata Cole's. That's her car, Doc said quietly. I know. Sabine, I know, Doc. Her voice had gone tight, controlled, the particular flatness of someone holding a great deal of feeling very far away from the front of their mind by sheer force of will. Positions. Now. They moved through the tree line in practiced silence. Doc taking the north approach, Sabine the south. Holt under strict, furious, whispered orders to stay in the truck, with the doors locked and the engine running. The farmhouse windows were dark. The outbuilding light flickered once, twice, like a bulb about to fail or like someone inside moving in front of it. Sabine reached the outbuilding wall first, pressed her back against weathered wood. Listened. Voices, two of them. One male, calm, almost gentle in tone. The kind of calm that came from a man who had made peace with whatever he was about to do. The other female. Familiar. A chingly familiar. Renata. Can't keep stalling him? Renata's voice was saying, tight with something that sounded, to Sabine's trained ear, less like betrayal and more like desperation. He's going to figure it out. He's already suspicious of the transmitter. He won't figure out anything until it's too late to matter, the male voice answered. Julian Voss. Sabine would have known that calm, deliberate cadence anywhere now, after this morning's handshake, after Theo's photograph. You've done exactly what you needed to do, Sergeant Cole. Your sister stays safe. That was always the deal. Sabine's stomach dropped through the floor, her sister. She keyed her radio, whisper quiet. Doc. North side, now. She came around the corner of the outbuilding with her weapon low and ready, and the scene inside hit her like a physical blow. Renata Cole, standing near a folding table, covered in surveillance photographs, her posture rigid, her face when she turned and saw Sabine in the doorway, going through an entire lifetime of emotion in under a second. Fear, shame, and underneath it, terrible, unmistakable relief. And Julian Voss, standing calm and unarmed at the far end of the room, looking at Sabine with the mild, almost curious expression of a man who had been expecting this exact moment for a very long time. Major Calder, he said, I wondered how long it would take you. Hands where I can see them. They already are. He held them up, slow, unthreatening, and something about his composure unsettled Sabine more than a weapon would have. I imagine Sergeant Cole has been explaining the situation. Sabine. Renata's voice cracked, all pretense gone now, the professional mask she'd worn for 4 years crumbling in real time. I didn't have a choice. He found my sister 3 months ago. Medical debt, a bad situation with people who'd hurt her if I didn't. She stopped, started again. He never asked me to hurt anyone, just to feed him timing. Locations. Enough to get himself close to your father today. I swear to you, Sabine, I never gave him anything that could get anyone killed. You gave him access to a public broadcast system at a federal ceremony, Renata. To force a confession, that's all he ever wanted. Renata's eyes were wet now, desperate, pleading. I checked. I made him swear no explosives, no weapons near the stage. He just wanted your father to say it out loud. In public. Once. After 35 years. Sabine looked at Voss. Weapons still trained, still steady, though something in her chest had begun, against every instinct she had, to ache with something that was not quite sympathy and not quite anger, but some exhausted, complicated cousin of both. Is that true, she said. No weapons. No intent to harm. I have spent 35 years wanting exactly one thing, Major. Voss's voice had gone quiet, almost gentle, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment 10,000 times in his own head, and found, now that it had finally arrived, that it didn't feel the way he'd expected. I wanted the world to know my brother did not die because the enemy got lucky. I wanted the world to know he died because a scared 28-year-old officer made a call under pressure, and then spent the next 35 years letting my family believe a different story so he could keep sleeping at night. He lowered his hands slowly. I never wanted to hurt your father, Major. I wanted him to finally tell the truth. That's the whole of it. That was always the whole of it. Doc's voice crackled through her earpiece. Actual perimeters clear. No additional hostiles detected. Whatever backup he had, it's not here. Sabine held her position a moment longer, weapon steady, mind racing through every angle of a situation that had just, in the space of 30 seconds, become far more complicated and far less simple than any operation she'd run in years. Because the man in front of her was not a terrorist, was not, by any honest measure, even really an enemy combatant in the way her training had prepared her to recognize one. He was a grieving brother who had waited 35 years for the truth. And the woman beside him, weeping now, weaponless, was not a traitor either. Was a soldier who had been backed into an impossible corner by a threat to the one person she loved most in the world, and had done the only thing she could think to do to keep that person alive. "Lower your weapon, Doc," Sabine said quietly into her radio, and then louder to the room. "Nobody in this barn is under arrest yet. But you're both going to start talking. All of it. Right now. Because in about 10 minutes my father is going to walk through that door. And I need to know exactly what he's walking into before he gets here." Voss's eyes flicked toward the door. Something in his expression shifted, not fear exactly, but a kind of bracing. The look of a man finally about to face the person he'd spent 35 years building toward this exact confrontation with. "Good," he said quietly. "Let him come." Outside, gravel crunched under tires. And somewhere behind Sabine, close enough now that she could hear the truck door open, before she could stop it, before she could give a single order to prevent it, her father's voice cut through the evening air, rough and unsteady and utterly unafraid. "Marcus Voss's little brother," Holt said, stepping into the doorway, his silhouette framed by the fading light behind him. 66 years old and standing straighter than Sabine had seen him stand all day. "I owe you 35 years of a conversation I never had the courage to have. Let's finally have it." Part 3. The barn held its breath, which was a strange thing for barn to do, Sabine would think later. But that was exactly how it felt in the moment. The overhead bulb flickering, dust hanging suspended in the last gray light coming through the slats. Her father standing in the doorway like a man walking into his own execution, except nobody in this room was holding a weapon on him anymore, and the only thing about to kill him was the truth. Julian Voss did not move. He simply looked at Holt Calder the way a man looks at a mountain he has spent his whole life climbing toward, finally standing at the base of it, uncertain whether the summit is going to feel like anything at all once he actually reaches it. "You look older than the photographs," Voss said finally. "So do you." Holt's voice came out steady barely. "Last time anyone showed me a picture of you, you were maybe 19, standing next to your brother at some family barbecue. He had your same jaw. You remember his jaw." "I remember everything about that night, Mr. Voss." Holt stepped further into the barn. Sassine's hand twitched toward her sidearm out of 8 years of pure reflex, and she made herself still it, because whatever was happening here did not belong to the Major anymore. It belonged to her father. I have remembered it every single day for 35 years, which is a strange thing to admit, because I spent 35 years also pretending I hadn't. Renata made a small sound near the folding table, not quite a sob. Something folded tighter than that, something that had been held in for months and was only now, watching 2 grieving men finally stand in the same room, beginning to come loose. "Say it," Voss said, quiet, almost gentle. "You made me wait 35 years, Sergeant Major. I've earned the words plain." Holt closed his eyes, because here it was. The sentence he'd rehearsed 1,000 times in the dark and never once said out loud to a living soul. Not to Louise on her deathbed, not to a chaplain, not to the mirror at 4 in the morning. On the anniversary, he never told anyone he still marked. "I had 4 seconds of doubt about that intelligence report," Holt said, and his voice did not break, though it clearly cost him everything he had to keep it from breaking. 4 seconds where some part of me knew the numbers didn't line up right. And I gave the order anyway, because I was 28, and scared and certainty was the only currency that kept men following you into a sandstorm. Your brother died because I chose to sound sure instead of sounding honest. And then I let the army write it up as an enemy engagement because admitting the truth meant admitting I'd killed him with my own hesitation, dressed up as confidence. The silence that followed had weight to it. Physical weight. Sabine felt it press against her sternum the same way she'd felt incoming fire press against her chest in rooms far more dangerous than this one, except this was worse, somehow, because there was no cover to take, nowhere to point a weapon. Nothing to do with her hands except stand there and watch her father finally bleed out something he'd been hemorrhaging quietly for 3.5 decades. Voss's jaw worked. Once. Twice. 35 years, he said. And his voice cracked clean down the middle. 35 years my mother went to her grave believing her son died a hero cut down by the enemy. 35 years I told my own kids a story I always half knew was incomplete. Because something about the official report never sat right, and I could never prove why. I know. You don't know. Voss's hands had balled into fists at his sides, though he made no move toward Holt, none at all. The fury in him burning somewhere underneath the surface without ever quite breaking through it. You don't know what it does to a family to grieve the wrong shape of a death. We built a whole story around a lie you handed us because it let you sleep easier. You're right. Holt didn't flinch from it, didn't reach for a single excuse. You're right, and I am sorry in a way I don't have words big enough for. I have carried this every day of my life, and I still let it cost your family 35 years of the wrong grief because I was too much of a coward to fix it while I still had the chance. You have the chance now. I know that too. Sabine watched her father's face in that moment and saw something she had never once witnessed in 30 years of daughterhood. Holt Calder, fully undefended. No rank between him and another man's grief. No uniform. No podium. No performance of the legend the whole county had gathered that morning to applaud. Just a 66-year-old man standing in a barn admitting the worst thing he had ever done to the one person who had waited his entire adult life to hear it. What do you want from him? Sabine asked quietly, because someone had to ask it. Because the operational part of her mind that never fully powered down, even in moments like this one, needed to know exactly what came next. Right now, tonight, what is it you actually want? Voss turned to look at her, and for the first time all day, something in his composed, patient exterior cracked, just slightly, just enough to show the exhausted, grieving man underneath the plan he'd spent years building. I wanted him to say it in public, Voss said. Not to me alone in a barn. I wanted the whole county that clapped for him this morning to hear the truth instead of the legend. I wanted my brother's name spoken honestly in the same square where they were about to carve your father's into a plaque. His voice thinned. I never wanted anyone hurt. I swear that to you, Major. I told Sergeant Cole from the very beginning. No weapons, no explosives. Just a broadcast override and enough leverage to make sure he couldn't walk away from the microphone without finally telling the truth. And the second signal, Sabine said. The one in the tree line. The one that didn't retreat when everyone else scattered. Voss's face changed. Just slightly. Just enough. That wasn't me, he said. And something in his voice had gone genuinely uncertain for the first time since Sabine had met him. I hired one man for perimeter security. Dale Kepner. Contractor I worked with years ago overseas. He was only ever supposed to watch the tree line and make sure nobody interfered before the broadcast went live. Where is he now? I don't know. And that, Sabine understood immediately, watching the flicker of real alarm cross Voss's controlled features, was the truest thing he'd said all evening. He should have reported back an hour ago. Doc's voice crackled low through Sabine's earpiece at almost the exact same moment, urgent in a way that snapped every ounce of her attention away from the barn and back into the Major's register, cold and fast and absolute. Actual. Movement on the northern tree line. One individual, armed, approaching the property. Not one of ours. Everything after that happened too fast for feelings to keep pace with it, which was, Sabine understood even as her body was already moving, its own kind of mercy, because feelings were expensive and slow, and this particular 90 seconds had no room in its budget for either. "Everybody down," she said, already pushing her father toward the wall, toward the thin cover of a stack of old grain barrels, her voice dropping into the flat absolute register that had, twice today now, made 200 people obey her without question. "Doc, position. Theo, I need eyes on that tree line right now." Sabine Holt started. "Down, Dad," and he went down. Because some part of him, the part that had spent 30 years, learning to trust a command voice the instant it entered. Arooms simply obeyed, the same way the whole town square had obeyed. That morning, the same way it turned out he'd been quietly, secretly proud of his whole life, without ever finding the words to say so. The barn door banged open. Dale Kepner stood silhouetted against the last purple light of evening, a rifle low in his hands, his face carrying the particular unraveled look of a man whose plan had gone sideways hours ago and had been unspooling further with every passing minute since. He was not, Sabine registered instantly, cataloging every detail with the cold speed of 8 years of training, a professional anymore. Professionals didn't announce themselves through a barn door. Professionals didn't have that wild, cornered look in their eyes. Professionals didn't panic. Kepner was panicking. "Voss." His voice cracked. "You said this was clean. You said nobody would even know I was out here. Now there's federal vehicles on the county road, and I've got a truck that's been idling in the woods for 4 hours, and I am not going down for this." "Dale." Voss's hands went up, slow, careful, the same calibrated calm Sabine had watched him use on her in the square that morning. "Nobody's going down for anything. Put the rifle down and we talk this through." "You don't get it." Kepner's eyes swept the barn, Voss, Renata. Sabine crouched near the barrels with her weapon steady. Holt flattened against the wall behind her. This was supposed to be one broadcast and a payday. Now it's a federal operation. And now there's a major in the mix. "I don't have a clean way out of this anymore." "There is a clean way out," Sabine said, and her voice, when it came, carried the specific calm she'd learned in rooms. Far worse than this one, not the calm of someone unafraid, but the calm of someone who had trained her body to sound unafraid regardless of what was actually happening underneath. "You put the weapon down. You walk out of here on your own 2 feet instead of being carried out. Nobody in this barn wants a body count tonight, not even you, Mr. Kepner, whatever it feels like right now. How do you know my name? Because I know everything about you that matters in the next 30 seconds, and that includes the fact that you have exactly 1 child, a 9-year-old, and a custody arrangement that does not survive you catching a federal charge tonight." She let that land, watched it land, watched something in Kepner's shoulders shift, just slightly, the rifle barrel dropping half an inch. "Put it down." For a moment, one long, suspended barn dust moment, nobody in the room breathed, until Kepner's hands began to shake, which was, Sabine understood a half-second too late, its own kind of danger, because a shaking hand on a trigger was infinitely more unpredictable than a steady one. "I can't," Kepner said, and his voice had gone thin, frayed. A man standing at the exact edge of a decision he did not actually want to make and could not see any other door out of. "I can't go to prison. I can't lose him. I can't." The rifle jerked, not aimed, not deliberate, just the involuntary flinch of a man whose hands had stopped listening to his brain, and, in the half-second that followed, several things happened at once, layered on top of each other, too fast for any single one of them to register as separate events. Doc moved from the doorway behind Kepner, fast and silent, despite his size, a hand closing over the rifle barrel and wrenching it upward exactly as the round fired a deafening crack that sent a hole punching through the barn roof instead of through any of the 6 people standing in that room. Renata screamed. Theo, crouched by the folding table with his laptops, threw himself flat, and Holt Calder, 66 years old, bad knee and all, moved from behind the grain barrels with a speed that belonged to a much younger man, tackling Kepner's legs from the side and driving him to the ground with the same brutal, economical technique he'd been teaching young soldiers for 30 years. Dad! Sabine was on them both in a second, weapon useless now at this range, hands instead pinning Kepner's wrist before he could reach for anything else. Doc already kneeling on his shoulders. The whole desperate scramble ending in less time than it took to describe. Kepner went still, all the fight draining out of him at once, replaced by something that looked, in the flickering barn light, almost like relief. "I'm sorry," he said, to no one in particular, to everyone at once. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt anybody. I just needed the money." Sabine looked up. Her father was breathing hard, one hand pressed against his side, his face gone pale in a way that had nothing to do with adrenaline. Dad, are you hit?" "I'm fine." He wasn't. She could see it in the way his hand pressed too hard against his ribs, the way his breath came shallow, winded. That's all. Old body, not used to tackling grown men anymore. "Doc, on it." Doc was already moving, medkit open, hands running fast and professional along Holt's side, and the relief that crossed his face a moment later loosened something in Sabine's chest that had been coiled tight since the moment the rifle went off. Bruised rib, maybe cracked. Nothing worse. "You'll live, old man." "Barely." "Barely still living," Holt said, and even through the pain there was something almost like humor in it. Some old soldier's reflex to make a joke the second the worst of the danger passed. Sabine sat back on her heels, hands shaking now that there was finally room for them to shake, and looked at her father, pale, wincing, one hand pressed to his ribs, having just physically tackled an armed man to save a room full of people that included the daughter he'd only found out that morning was capable of doing exactly the same thing for a living. "You could have died," she said. Quiet. Furious. Terrified still, underneath the fury. "So could you," Holt said. "Every day for 8 years, apparently, and I never even got to be scared about it because I never knew to be." He reached out, took her hand. His grip was steadier than it had any right to be. "Seems fair I finally got to do something about it for once." They cleared the property within the hour. Federal coordination moved fast once Theo's data package went out through channels. Sabine had spent 8 years building trust within Kepner in custody, cooperative, eager in the particular desperate way of a man trying to trade information for leniency. Voss remarkably did not resist at all, stood with his hands folded in front of him, while Doc read him his rights with the flat, procedural gentleness of a man who had clearly decided, somewhere in that barn, that whatever consequences came next were consequences he had been owed for 35 years, and was finally ready to accept. "What happens to him?" Renata asked, watching from beside the truck as Voss was led toward a federal vehicle that had arrived 20 minutes earlier, its lights washing blue and red across the quarry's gravel drive. "Depends on a lot of things," Sabi said. "Depends on what he actually did versus what Kepner did without his knowledge. Depends on whether a federal prosecutor believes a man who spent 35 years chasing the truth deserves the same sentence as a man who panicked and fired a rifle in a barn full of people." She watched Voss pause at the vehicle door, turn, and look back toward where Holt stood, ribs taped, jaw set, watching him go. "Depends, maybe, on what my father is willing to say on his behalf. Would he do that? After everything?" "I don't know," Sabine admitted. "I've known my father for 30 years, and today's the first day I've actually understood him." Renata was quiet for a moment, hugging her arms around herself despite the warm evening air. And Sabine watched her, weighing everything Doc had told her in low, urgent tones. 20 minutes ago, the sister, the debt, the threats. 4 months of a woman carrying an impossible weight alone, because she'd been too afraid to bring it to the one team on Earth who would have moved heaven and earth to help her carry it instead. "You should have told me," Sabine said finally. "Not unkind, just true. I know. The moment he came to you, the very first moment, you should have brought it straight to me. I know that too." Renata's voice cracked. "I kept thinking I could handle it myself. Kept thinking if I just gave him enough small things, timing, nothing that could actually hurt anyone, I could keep my sister safe without ever putting the team at risk." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, furious at her own tears in the particular way of someone who had spent years learning never to show them. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I put your father in danger and I lied to your face for months, and I understand if this ends my career. Sabine looked at her for a long moment, because there was a version of this conversation where the major took over completely, where 4 years of trust dissolved into a formal debrief, a suspension, a long, cold process that would technically be correct, and would also, Sabine understood with sudden clarity, be exactly the kind of lonely, brittle justice that had let her own father carry a secret in silence for 35 years instead of ever finding a way to set it down. Your sister, Sabine said instead. Is she safe right now? Theo's already got someone moving toward her location. Should have eyes on her within the hour. Then that's what matters first. Sabine put a hand on Renata's shoulder. Firm. Steady. The gesture of a commander who had decided, in real time, what kind of leader she actually wanted to be. We're going to have a long conversation about protocol and trust, and every single thing you should have brought to me the day it started. But that conversation happens after your sister is safe, and after you've slept for the first time in months. Not tonight, in a gravel parking lot, standing next to a man in handcuffs. Renata's face crumpled, finally, all the way, months of held breath breaking loose at once. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. But Sabine's voice had softened despite herself. You still owe this team an apology, longer than the one you just gave me. I know, and you still work for me, Sergeant. That much doesn't change tonight. Sabine squeezed her shoulder once and let go. Go make sure Theo's tracking your sister's extraction properly. I'll deal with everything else. They drove back into Larkspur Hollow a little after 9, the truck quiet, in a way that felt earned rather than exhausted. The county road, unspooling dark and familiar beneath the headlights. Holt sat in the back with an ice pack against his ribs, watching the trees slide by the same way he had on the drive out, except everything about the way he watched them had changed in the space of a single, unbearable afternoon. You know, he said, breaking the silence somewhere around the county line, Max probably called me 11 times. 12, Sabine said, checking her phone. He also called me. Twice. What'd you tell him? That his old army buddy tackled an armed man in a barn today and is currently sitting in the back seat with a cracked rib, complaining that the ice pack is melting into the seat cushion. I am not complaining. You've mentioned the melting 3 times. It's a valid observation. Ping pong. The old rhythm, worn smooth by 30 years of practice, except something underneath it had shifted permanently. Some final wall finally come down between them that neither one of them fully had words for yet. The ceremony, Holt said, after a while, quieter now. The town. Everyone saw what happened this morning. Half the county probably thinks I raised some kind of secret assassin. You raised a soldier, Dad. I raised a major, he said, and something in his voice caught, thick with a pride he no longer had any reason to hide. United States Army. Command of her own task force. 8 years, and I spent every single one of them thinking you moved paperwork in some office overseas, feeling sorry for myself that my daughter chose a desk over the life I'd built mine around. He shook his head slowly, staring out at the dark trees. I was so busy being disappointed in a lie, I never once stopped to ask if the truth might be something I'd be proud of instead. Are you? Sabine asked, and hated how small her voice came out. Hated that after everything, after 8 years of secrecy and one impossible day of chaos, some part of her still needed to hear the answer out loud. Proud of me. The real version. Holt was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Doc, driving, glanced once in the rearview mirror. And then, with the tact of a man who had spent 29 years learning exactly when to disappear from a conversation, said nothing at all and kept his eyes on the road. Sabine. Holt's voice, when it finally came, had gone rough in a way she'd only heard twice before today. I have been proud of you since you were 7 years old and outshot every boy at the county fair and looked at me like you needed permission to feel good about it. I have been proud of you every single day since. I was just too much of a coward and too stuck in my own idea of what strength was supposed to look like to ever say it in a way that didn't come out sounding like a briefing. He reached forward, awkward with the ice pack still pressed to his ribs, and put a hand on her shoulder from the back seat. Today, you stood in front of 200 people and gave a command that every single one of them obeyed without question, including me. And I have never in my life been more proud of anyone. Sabine did not trust herself to answer that right away. Because 30 years of careful architecture, every wall she'd built, every lie she'd maintained, every ounce of distance she'd manufactured to protect a father who had never once asked her to protect him, all of it cracked open at once. Right there in the back of a moving truck on a dark Virginia county road, and there was nothing left to do but let it. "I love you, Dad," she said. "I should have found a way to tell you the truth years ago." Maybe. Holt's hand tightened on her shoulder. Or maybe some truths need exactly the wrong day to finally come out, so the people who love us stop being scared enough to finally hear them right. The town of Larkspur Hollow gathered again 3 days later. Not because anyone had planned it that way. Originally, the retirement ceremony had ended, as far as the official record was concerned. The moment the first shot rang out over that Oak Tree Junction box, an unfinished sentence hanging in the June air for a county that had spent the following 72 hours consuming exactly one story on every porch, every diner counter, every church pew. The quiet Calder girl was some kind of army officer, and something had happened out at the old Ashworth place. And wasn't that just the strangest thing anybody'd heard since the flood of '96? But Guy Pruitt, sunburned and earnest and utterly incapable of leaving a ceremony unfinished, had called Holt on the second day and asked, with genuine humility in his voice for possibly the first time in his tenure as mayor, whether the town might be allowed to try again. Properly, this time. With the whole story, whatever version of it, Holt was willing to share. Holt had said yes before he'd finished asking. The square looked different this time. Fewer flags. Somehow, though nothing had actually been removed, it was simply that everyone standing among them looked at the bunting and the folding chairs with a kind of reverence that hadn't been there 3 days earlier, when the ceremony had still been mostly about applause. The WLKH van was back, its cameraman noticeably more careful with his lens, this time having learned, the hard way, exactly how fast a quiet moment could turn into something else entirely. Sabine stood at the back of the crowd again, except this time she wasn't hiding. She wore her dress uniform, major's insignia catching the afternoon light, ribbons she had never once explained to her father arranged in careful, silent rows across her chest. And when she'd walked into the square an hour earlier, dressed exactly as what she actually was for the first time in this town's memory, she'd watched an entire crowd of people who had known her since childhood look at her the way you look at a photograph you thought you understood, and suddenly see, for the first time, in full color. Mac Raynor had cried, openly, unashamedly, the way only a man who'd survived a war could cry over something that wasn't even really about him. "Knew it," he'd said, wiping his eyes with the back of a weathered hand. "Always knew there was something more to that girl. Your mother would have..." He'd stopped himself. Started again. "Your mother would have been the proudest woman in this whole county." Sabine had held that sentence close to her chest ever since, like something warm she wasn't ready to set down. Now Holt climbed the 3 steps onto the gazebo stage, ribs still taped beneath his shirt, moving carefully but standing straight, and the crowd's applause rolled up gentler this time, less thunderous, more like held breath being finally released. Guy Pruitt wisely kept his remarks short. "Folks," the mayor said, 3 days ago we tried to have this ceremony and, well," a small self-deprecating laugh rippled through the crowd. "Let's just say it didn't go quite the way any of us planned." But Holt asked if he could finish what he started. And I think, after everything, we owe him the chance to say it his own way. He stepped back from the microphone, and Holt Calder stood alone on the gazebo stage, looking out at a crowd of folding chairs, at flags snapping gently in a warm June breeze, at his daughter standing tall and visible at the back of the crowd in the uniform she'd spent 8 years hiding from him, and began again. "Friends," he said, 30 years ago I signed my name on a line I didn't fully understand the weight of, the same opening, the same words he'd started with 3 days earlier, before everything had torn open. Except this time, he didn't stop there. "I used to think that line was about service," he said. about duty, about 30 years of following orders and giving them, about a chest full of ribbons I could point to and say, "That's what it cost, that's what I gave." I used to think that was the whole story. He paused, looked down at his hands on the podium. I was wrong. The truest cost of that line was never the years. It was the truth I let myself avoid telling because the truth was harder to carry than the legend. The square had gone very quiet. 35 years ago, under my command, a young soldier named Marcus Voss died because I made a call I wasn't certain of and let my fear of sounding uncertain speak louder than my doubt. I let his family believe a story that let me sleep at night instead of the truth that would have let them actually grieve. I have carried that weight every single day since, and 3 days ago, his brother finally forced me to set it down in front of all of you, whether I was ready or not. His voice cracked, and he let it, no longer hiding from it the way he'd hidden from everything else for 35 years. I am not standing up here today as a hero. I'm standing up here as a man who made a mistake with real consequences, who was too afraid for too long to say so, and who is finally sorry. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman began to cry. Several others followed. "There's something else," Holt said, and now his eyes found Sabine, standing tall at the back of the square, and something in his whole posture softened, opened, became something the whole town had genuinely never seen from him in 30 years of watching him stand in front of them. 3 days ago, I stood on this exact stage and told you all this ceremony wasn't really about me. I meant it as a nice sentiment. I didn't understand yet how true it actually was. He paused, let the silence hold. My daughter has spent 8 years protecting people whose names I will never know, in places I'm not allowed to ask about, doing work more dangerous and more important than anything I ever did in 30 years of service. And she did every bit of it while also protecting me from the worry, from the fear, from the 2 a.m. phone calls that never came, because she made sure I never had to survive them. I spent 8 years thinking my daughter chose a quiet life over the one I'd hoped for her. His voice broke fully now, unashamed, in front of the entire county. I was wrong about that too. She didn't choose smaller. She chose harder, and braver, and better than anything I ever managed. And she did it without once asking me for the credit I should have been giving her all along. He straightened, winced slightly, against the tape on his ribs, and did not let it stop him. "Major Sabine Calder," he said, his voice carrying clear across the square. "I have spent 30 years claiming I was the one who ran this family. The truth is, you have been the strongest person in it since you were 7 years old with a BB gun out shooting every boy at this fair. And I was just too proud and too stubborn to say so out loud, until the whole world made me." He came to attention, fully, formally. 30 years of muscle memory snapping his spine into a line so straight, it looked like it might have hurt his taped ribs to hold it, and raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute, not the casual gesture of a retired soldier greeting a friend, but the full, precise salute of a subordinate rendering honors to a superior officer, offered by a father, in front of an entire town, to his own daughter. The square went utterly silent. And then, somewhere near the front row, Mac Rayner rose from his folding chair, cane forgotten again, and returned the salute himself, unsteady but resolute. And beside him, one by one, other veterans in the crowd began to rise, men who had served in deserts and jungles, and places whose names the county newspaper never printed correctly. Men who understood exactly what they were witnessing, even if they couldn't have explained it in words until half the square stood at attention, saluting a 30-year-old woman in a dress uniform who had spent 8 years being invisible in this exact town and would, after today, never be invisible in it again. Sabine felt her throat close entirely. She did not remember deciding to walk forward, only that she was moving, through the standing crowd, toward the gazebo, toward her father. And when she reached the base of the steps, she stopped and returned the salute with the full, formal precision of 8 years of training, her arms steady even though everything else in her was shaking. "At ease, Dad," she said, quiet, just for him, though the microphone caught it anyway and carried it out across the whole square, and a ripple of gentle laughter moved through the crowd. warm and human, and exactly the kind of release 200 people badly needed after everything. Holt lowered his hand, and in front of the whole town, in front of the cameras, in front of 30 years of careful distance, finally, completely dissolved, he pulled his daughter into an embrace that neither one of them had allowed themselves in longer than either could remember. "I am so proud of you," he said into her hair, quiet enough that only she could hear it. "I should have found a way to say that every single day of your life instead of waiting for a stranger with a grudge to force it out of me." "You said it today," Sabine answered, her voice thick. "That's what matters." They held the smaller ceremony 2 weeks later, out past the county line on a quiet stretch of hillside that had nothing to do with any government record or official commendation. Julian Voss stood there in street clothes instead of handcuffs, a federal prosecutor having agreed, after considerable advocacy from both Holt and Sabine, that a man who had orchestrated a broadcast disruption but explicitly forbidden any weapon or explosive, who had cooperated fully once caught, and who had spent 35 years grieving a truth the government itself had helped obscure, deserved a resolution measured in restitution and supervised release rather than years behind bars. Dale Kepner had not been so fortunate and would not be joining anyone on any hillside for a very long time, a fact that troubled exactly no one present. Renata stood a respectful distance back, her sister safe now, relocated, protected under arrangements. Theo had spent 2 weeks quietly, meticulously building beside her, both women's eyes red but steady. Holt had brought a small wooden marker. Handmade, nothing official, nothing the army would ever recognize, just 2 words carved deep into pale oak and a date. And beneath it, in smaller letters he'd spent 3 evenings deciding how to phrase, "He did not die for nothing. He died because I was afraid, and I am sorry it took me 35 years to say so honestly." He knelt to set it into the hillside earth himself, ribs still faintly sore, hands steady despite everything. "I can't give you your brother back," he said, standing, facing Voss directly. "No podium between them this time, no crowd, no camera. I can't undo 35 years of the wrong story. All I can offer you is the true one, spoken as many times as you need to hear it, for as long as I'm still standing here to say it." Voss looked at the marker for a long moment, and something in his face, tight and guarded for 35 years, finally, quietly came apart. "That's more than I ever actually thought I'd get," he said. "I spent so long planning how to force it out of you that I never once let myself imagine what it would feel like to just be given it instead. You should have been given it a long time ago." "Yeah." Voss wiped his eyes, unashamed, the same way Holt had been unashamed on the gazebo stage 2 weeks earlier. "Well, we're both a little late to a lot of things, I think." Sabine stood at the edge of the small gathering, watching her father and a man, who had every right to hate him, stand together on a quiet hillside instead, and felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't known was still unsettled, some final, private reconciliation between the 2 women she'd spent 8 years being, the daughter and the major, finally standing in the same body without either one having to hide from the other anymore. Doc came to stand beside her, hands in his pockets, watching the same scene. "Quite a 2 weeks, he said. "Quite a 2 weeks, she agreed. "You gonna tell him about the promotion board next month?" Sabine glanced at him. "Not today." "Fair." Doc almost smiled. Give the man a minute to catch his breath. He's had a lot of firsts lately. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the small hillside gathering, watching a grieving brother and a guilty old soldier find, slowly, painfully, something that looked almost like peace between them, watching Renata's shoulders finally loosen, watching her sister lean her head against her arm, watching Theo, off to one side, quietly documenting nothing at all for once, just standing present in a moment that didn't need a laptop or a signal trace or anything except 6 people, willing to finally tell the truth to each other. "You did good, actual," Doc said quietly. "We did good," Sabine corrected. "Sure." He bumped her shoulder, gentle, the closest thing to affection the job usually allowed. "But you're the one who's gonna have to explain to your father why you're leaving again in a week." Sabine looked toward the hillside, toward her father standing straighter than she'd seen him stand in years, toward the marker in the earth, and the family finally, painfully, beginning to heal around it. "He'll understand," she said. "He finally knows what it means when I say I have somewhere to be. And if he doesn't?" She thought about the salute. About 200 people rising to their feet in a town square. About 30 years of silence finally broken open by a single unguarded sentence spoken into a microphone that used to only ever carry his voice, and now, for the first time, had carried the truth of them both. "He will," she said. "He finally sees me. That's not something either of us is going to lose again." That evening back at the house, Holt made eggs. Overcooked, the same way he always made them, and Sabine ate them anyway. Sitting across the same kitchen table, where 2 weeks earlier she'd told her father a lie about paperwork and pallets that had held for 8 careful years. And finally, mercifully, come apart. "You know," Holt said, watching her eat, "I could learn to cook these properly. Your mother tried to teach me for 20 years. "Don't you dare," Sabine said. "Bad eggs are a family tradition now. I'd miss them, even though they're terrible, especially because they're terrible." Ping pong. The old rhythm, worn smooth and familiar, except every word between them now carried a lightness that hadn't been there in years. No more careful architecture, no more locked doors. Just a father and daughter finally, fully, sitting in the same kitchen without a single secret standing between them. Outside, the flag on the porch moved gently in the evening air. Down the road, the Baptist church's sign had already changed its joke for Sunday. And somewhere out past the county line, a wooden marker sat in quiet hillside earth, holding a truth that had finally, after 35 years, been allowed to breathe. Holt reached across the table, took his daughter's hand, the same way he had in the back of that truck 2 weeks earlier, except this time there was no fear in it, no adrenaline, nothing except a man finally, completely present with the person he loved most in the world. "I used to think running this house meant being the loudest voice in it," he said quietly. "Took me 66 years, and a stranger with a grudge, to learn that real strength was never about who talks the longest. It's about who shows up. Who tells the truth even when it costs them everything. Who stands and serves and never once asks for the credit." "That's a good line, Dad. I've had 2 weeks to think about it." Sabine laughed, soft and real, and squeezed his hand. "For what it's worth," she said, "you did both." Eventually, Holt agreed. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the word didn't sound like regret. It sounded like something closer to peace.